Welcome, fantastic friends, to the new episode of the Fancast at 4 podcast, the number one Fantastic Four fancasting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
I'd say conceivably. I'm Dan Bettenhausen.
And I am Jack Mayer.
We are your hosts as we venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
With Matt Shakman set to direct the MCU's Fantastic Four film, we still could explore what it would be like if a different director was behind the camera, and who might they cast?
This week, we are excited to have a special guest, Eli McCaig, creator of the Mr. Eli Mac channel on YouTube, joining us. Eli, thank you for coming on our show. Please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, you said a good chunk of it. I am the creator and main host of the Mr. Eli Mac YouTube channel. I have a podcast that I have on there called A Wrestling Podcast with Mr. Eli Mac, where I just talk about whatever I want in the world of wrestling. I also have a very popular, in quotes, show called Pitch This, which is basically me taking a concept that I really want to talk about and just pitch a movie around it. One of my most popular series when it comes to that is my 9-part Five Nights at Freddy's series, where I'm just adapting the 9 popular and actually canon, quote unquote, Five Nights at Freddy's games and making them into movies. And as you can see now, we're about to get a Five Nights at Freddy's movie being made soon. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. And yeah, that's basically me.
So if you're an expert pitcher, you're in the right place.
Exactly, just what I was going to say.
Oh, trust me, when I watched the Chris Anthony Lopez one, whenever I heard Chris's, I was like, that's exactly what I would have done with my movie. Now, if I'm ever on this show, I got to think of something else.
Well, you wouldn't have done the Who Framed the Fantastic Four, where everyone lives in DC land?
No, I wouldn't have done that because my brain does not go that out of the box. I would have been so stuck in the box.
I'd take that as a compliment, Jack, if I were you.
I think I will. Well, with Eli introduced, let's take an opportunity to introduce the director we will be discussing today. He is an American film and theater director, producer, and choreographer who first started his career as a Broadway dancer. However, after suffering a herniated disc during a performance of Cats, he moved into choreography and then directing.
I can't believe Cats betrayed him like this.
It's disgusting.
He has been nominated for 4 times at the Tony Awards for choreography. He has been nominated for Best Director once at the Academy Awards, with 2 of his films winning 9 awards in other categories. This week, we are featuring Rob Marshall. Eli and Jack, what else comes to mind for you when you think about Rob Marshall?
I mean, all I think about mainly when I think of Rob Marshall is all the musicals that he has made in his entire time of being a film director. I think there's only one movie in his entire filmography that isn't a musical, I believe, and I think that's Memoirs of a Geisha. But other than that, it's just so many musicals, so many like hits, some that could be considered misses, but nonetheless, whenever you think about Rob Marshall and you see his filmography, you can tell that he really cares about musicals, and you can tell like his love for theater and him being a part of theater really does go into the movies and the musicals that he has made, because you feel that theatricality whenever you watch those movies.
I think he's a very interesting kind of musical director, and not one that we typically see in Hollywood making these kinds of outlandish, big Broadway style movies nowadays. Like, he's got a much more theatrical style to the way that he chooses to approach the material than, say, Tom Hooper, who shoots everything like it is a serious King's Speech drama. Rob Marshall at least knows how to have fun with the camera. The adaptation of the musicals, we'll get into those a little bit later. It can get a little iffy, but it's always interesting to watch, at least, I want to say.
Yeah, to bounce off of that, without getting too spoilery into the films we are going to discuss, I feel like he is adept at making them feel like you're watching a movie and a stage production at the same time. And it's very, in a lot of senses, very inoffensive. I don't know how many chances he takes as a director, and that's why I think some of his films work better and some of his works don't work so well. Mm-hmm. But also, he did direct a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. on
That
top of
too.
Memoirs of
He
a
did do
Geisha,
that.
which I don't think I actually watched.
I've seen
Yes.
all of them, so if that one's the one that I forgot about, there's a
What
reason
does that
for
say?
it.
It's the fourth one.
Yeah.
Yikes. Well, I think that is a great segue into our first segment, four fantastic films. Here we will discuss four films directed by Rob Marshall, and we will start with his 2002 Best Picture winner, Chicago. Dan, I believe this was your pick.
This was my pick. I love this movie. This is probably the Rob Marshall movie that I think works extremely well because I think he was able to take a stage production that is very minimal. It is very, there isn't a big set. There's not a lot of production design when it comes to this stage show. And he maximized it, I think, appropriately for the big screen. I think it was well cast. All the actors and actresses in this film, I think, top notch, great for their parts. The direction of the musical numbers themselves had a lot of energy, were frenetic, were sexy in the places they needed to be. And I think, for better or worse, for being the first film we're talking about, I think it's far and away his best film, and a reason why it won Best Picture. I love Chicago. I will let you talk before I could talk another hour about it, so I will let someone else provide their input.
Well, I'll go next then. When it comes to Chicago, Chicago was one of those movies that originally I didn't really attach myself to because when I was first starting, like it wasn't really until high school when I got bit by that musical theater bug. So sort of once I hit high school, that was when I was like, okay, I gotta play catch up. I gotta try to watch as many movies that were based off of musical theater shows as I could. And so when I got to Chicago, that was one of the ones where I was like, oh, this is doing something different because mainly with the acting scenes, not really with the musical numbers, just the moments where people are acting and doing all that sort of stuff. That was when we're in sort of, yes, here's the movie portion, but it's like once you started the musical numbers, that was the moment where it's like, here is the stage production because they are all singing to an audience when they do a majority of the musical numbers with Taye Diggs introducing every single one of the musical numbers and every single one of them, every single song in Chicago, no matter what, all of them are bangers. And the one that I always go to is the Cell Block Tango. I believe that's what it was called. I can't remember.
Yep.
Yeah,
But
Cell Block Tango.
that is the song of the movie. If no one was thinking that, then I'm probably the only one that thinks Cell Block Tango is the song of the movie because all of the women were just giving it their all. And then when Catherine Zeta-Jones just starts singing her heart out in that song, that was when it's like, all right, there's something different about Chicago than all the other movie musicals that had come out before then. And yeah, Chicago was so great. The cast, again, you mentioned it, it was so perfectly cast. Catherine Zeta-Jones, like, killing it, being the show stealer very much. Richard Gere is a character or is an actor I never would have thought of putting in a movie musical. Then you see and you're like, oh, it makes sense. He's really good in this role. But yeah, Chicago, one of his best films, if not his best film. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Chicago.
Yeah, the only reason this wasn't my choice is because it was Dan's choice. I love this movie, and I especially love the way that it uses its musical sequences. Last year in film school, I had a whole course about musicals, backstage musicals in movies, and the way that they use diegetic and non-diegetic sound. Real quick, diegetic sound is sound that's happening in the world of the movie. And I think it's so interesting that Chicago only has two numbers. The movie musical only has two numbers that are diegetic, and it's the opening, All That Jazz, and it's the finale, Hot Honey Rag, that Roxy and Velma perform together. Everything else is done inside the characters' heads, and I think that's such a smart thing to do because it allows for this really gritty setting of a 1920s female prison in Chicago to then break into this lavish, like, huge choreography. Renee Zellweger being a puppet for Richard Gere. It allows those things to work still in the context of the movie. Chicago, I will say, also sort of starts us on a path for movie musicals, for better or for worse, where musicals feel as though they need to have some sort of grounded element to them in order to become big awards bait pushes. We saw it with Tom Hooper trying to replicate that style, and in my personal opinion, absolutely failing to do so, except for Cats. Cats is
Right.
amazing.
Right.
But Rob Marshall really nailed it, and he did it really well with Chicago. It started a trend that is obviously not great, but he at least did it well.
Yeah, there's a reason people tried to emulate it, and you touched on a few numbers kind of indirectly that I need to make sure I mention. I think the We Both Reach for the Gun scene is fantastic, where Billy Flynn, played by Richard Gere, is kind of telling Roxy Hart what to say to the press corps, led by Christine Baranski's character, which again, she's fantastic in that small part. And
Notice
then,
how his mouth never moves.
right,
Almost.
kind of like how this is the best, the number one Fantastic Four fan casting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
And then, hands down, this movie led to John C. Reilly becoming one of my favorite actors.
Oh, he's fantastic.
The Mr. Cellophane scene is one I go back to constantly. He was the perfect person, the perfect voice, the perfect demeanor to be Amos and do that scene. And one person I don't want to overlook too, who really surprised me, was Queen Latifah as Mama Morton and her scenes there. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and I feel like I wish we saw more that lead to more bigger, kind of more prestigious roles for her, because that, I think she was really great in the movie too.
Yeah, and this was I watched the Chicago right after. Sort of, I had known John C. Reilly mainly for his comedies with Will Ferrell, and like that's how I got to know him. And when I watched Chicago and I saw his performance in this was sort of the turning point for me, where I was like, oh, John C. Reilly can do more than just those crazy, goofy comedies with Will Ferrell. I very much want him to do more of Chicago than Step Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I love him in Step Brothers, but I prefer him in Chicago.
I agree. His dramatic fare I find tends to be more captivating than his comedic stuff. Although his comedic stuff is still very funny.
So I'm going to end the Chicago conversation with the beginning. One thing I want to make sure too, you touched on All That Jazz. That number rockets you right into the beginning of the film.
Absolutely. And the way that it's done as well, we're like showing the blood on her hands.
I would say Catherine Zeta-Jones kills it. Literally, figuratively, metaphorically, all the Italies that you can imagine is propelled by that first performance of All That Jazz. But Jack, let's move on to our next film.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to flash forward 7 years later to 2009's Nine. So this one was my choice, and I have an interesting relationship to this movie because I don't think it's very good, but I am fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the musical Nine in general, and I'm fascinated by how Rob Marshall got the people to star in it that he did, and just how it got made. It's such a strange film that even if I don't like it, I kind of admire it.
It's like watching a car crash, like you just can't look away.
Yeah.
I only watched this movie in preparation for the podcast because I've heard it was terrible. My review of this, or rather more of a synopsis, is Daniel Day-Lewis plays a horned-up Italian director going through a musical existential crisis and whose sexual awakening as a child was due to Fergie.
And that's exactly what happens. That is the movie in a nutshell. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, check out 2009.
More power to you.
But like, that's the thing. It's just like, I was looking up Daniel Day-Lewis's filmography. Like, it's such a strange role for him to take on at this point in his career. Like, I'm just like, how did he get convinced into doing this? What was his process for doing this? I want to know what, like,
how did he go?
Second actor Daniel Day-Lewis was doing right after There Will Be Blood. He's like, I really want to do this Rob Marshall musical about
this horny musical
Italian director. Maybe the horniest musical. That's the other thing, is that, like, no, this is not a great movie, but it's a strange movie to pick as an adaptation as well. Like, it's a weird musical.
And that's my biggest issue. There is no number. I watched it a week ago, and I don't remember a single musical number.
I just remember Guido Contini, Luis Contini. That's all I remember.
Now that is going to be
That's
stuck in my head for the next hour, and then I'll forget it again. But I think that's the biggest thing with a musical. The music needs to be memorable, good or bad, and this was just neither.
Yeah,
Eli,
it was.
anything to say?
Well, it wasn't until like you both started talking about the musical numbers when I was like, wait, what was a musical number in that? And it was just like talking about it, just Cinema Italiano just popped in my head. I was like, oh yeah, that was a song in the movie. And Dan, same with you. I didn't watch this movie until last week when in preparation for this. And I was just thinking, man, I wonder why I've never watched this movie. I sat down, I was like, I don't hate it, but it's not the best movie musical to ever exist.
That's where I'm at as well.
Because it does that. Because I was watching it and I realized it was doing the Chicago thing where there'd be moments where, hey, this is sort of what's really happening. But then for the musical numbers, it's on a stage for an audience. And I was like, okay, so Rob, you're doing what you did in Chicago again with 9, but you're doing it sort of lesser here because as I was watching the movie, I was looking up the musical at the exact same time. They took out a lot of songs in the movie. They took out some plot points too. And I was like, this is so interesting that you're adapting this musical, but yet you're changing it as well. And when I did research on why Daniel Day-Lewis wanted to do the movie, he said, or I read that he literally recorded an audition tape of him singing a song just so he could be in the movie. I did not realize Daniel Day-Lewis wanted to be in a musical that bad.
That is crazy.
And that could have been the thing where he was like, okay, I'm probably never going to get an opportunity to do a musical ever again. I'll just check it off the box. Check the box, and then I'll move on.
I am doing some revisionist history now. Just imagine if we had Daniel Day-Lewis instead of Pierce Brosnan in the Mamma Mia films.
Oh my God.
The singing would have been better because I will say Daniel Day-Lewis has a really good singing voice.
It was competent singing.
Dan, you should have put that in my head. I need Daniel Day-Lewis Mamma Mia now. You shouldn't. I'm imagining every scene with like him and Meryl Streep together.
Two of our
on an island.
Greatest actors.
Skrelting the winner takes it all now to Daniel Day-Lewis while the sun is setting behind them. Also,
they both would be trying to outact each other because they're both sort of like in the category of the greatest actor versus the greatest actress. So they'd be like competing, like, no, I'm going to do better. No, I'm going to do better.
Mamma Mia.
This also came right after There Will Be Blood for him and was immediately followed by Lincoln.
It's so strange. His path.
Like that's the thing, is just like, as much as I acknowledge that this movie is not good, just like Cats, I can't hate it. I can't quite get myself there because I'm just like, it's so weird, and I just respect the weirdness. I respect the swing.
I acknowledge the weirdness. I don't know if I can respect it because, again, listeners, you know mine and Jack's affinity for Cats.
I thought you were going to say trash, but yes, Cats as well.
Cats.
Cats is not trash.
No, and neither is Mamma Mia or Mamma Mia 2. Here we go again.
Absolutely.
Again, even with like Cats or Mamma, like the music is memorable. And I know I sound like a broken record here, but that's the biggest sin, I think, with 9.
Yeah. Like
I agree with that.
Like you can barely remember any of the songs. And if you do remember a song, it's because, oh yeah, this is one of the songs. I will say Marion Cotillard is probably the best performer in the entire movie in terms of acting. Sure, it's not a high bar, but still, whenever there's a scene with Marion Cotillard, I always think she's giving it her best.
So I think it's a good spot to move on to our third film, and this was Eli's pick. We jump forward a handful of years to 2014's Stephen Sondheim adaptation of Into the Woods. Eli, being this is your pick, I'll turn it over to you to discuss why you like this movie so much.
So in 2014 when Into the Woods came out. I had a group of friends and we would like make movies together. That summer we did a modern adaptation of A Christmas Carol, but the main thing was we all had done shows together. But the right before I started high school, my friend had done Into the Woods for school that summer. So he was very connected to it. My other friend also helped out with that show. So they were both very connected to Into the Woods. So when Into the Woods was coming out in the theaters, they were like, Eli, you need to come watch Into the Woods. Like, you'll finally get it. Because at the time, I had not seen a version of Into the Woods, so I was just like, okay, let's see what's Into the Woods. And when I watched it, it was one of those moments of, oh yeah, this is pretty good, but I feel like it's missing something. Like it was when I watched Into the Woods for the first time in theaters, I was like, this is missing something. I don't know what it was. And then I did research and that was when I discovered like the Rapunzel plotline in Act 2 was just gone from the film. And like that was sort of the time when I was like, okay, Into the Woods is good, but it's missing a lot of things to make it great. And even looking back at it now, I'm like, yeah, it's still good. Meryl Streep is really good as the witch. Emily Blunt kills it as the baker's wife. Chris Pine, every single time, if I go back into the Woods, it's so I can watch Chris Pine as Cinderella's prince, because my God, he is amazing. That was the moment where I was like, please play more roles like this. But then I also think about James Corden in the movie, and I'm like, you could have gotten another actor instead of James Corden. And that was sort of the start of James Corden being in every single musical that people now sort of hate. So, yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. He was stellar as Bustopher Jones.
Well, I'll admit I haven't seen Cats. Look,
you're on the musical episode.
We're ending this episode here. Sorry,
this has been the Fancast podcast.
Look, sure, I'm on the musical episode and I haven't seen Cats. It's just I just haven't felt myself compelled to watch it.
Well, we're compelling you.
Now I feel like I need to watch Cats right after.
The power of Cats compels you.
But yeah, like that's my entire history with this film. Is just every time I go back to it, or every time I think about going back to watch it, it's one of those. Do I really want to? Because now at this point, I have seen a full stage version of Into the Woods, and now I feel like I'm going to compare the two, and I feel like I'm going to be more critical on the movie, even though I still enjoy the movie. But yeah, like that's the main thing. That's my history with Into the Woods. So I'll stop talking now.
Jack, I know you're a Sondheim guy. I want to hear your thoughts on.
I want to go to you first here on this one, Dan. I have a lot of thoughts on this one, so I think I should throw this to you first.
I did not like this movie the first time I saw it back in theaters. I tell you why now. I rewatched it again in preparation for this, and I liked it more. A lot of the musical numbers really hit different for me, and I thought it was much more enjoyable upon a rewatch. I think I agree with Eli as far as like the actors who were really stand out here. Honestly, not much more to say here. I mean, it's a fun premise, kind of these adaptations of these fairy tales, getting all thrown in, how they're interwoven. But yeah, don't have a lot of thoughts.
I hate this movie. I love Into the Woods. I think it is, while it's not, I don't think it's Sondheim's best. I do think it is his most complex from a musical and lyrical standpoint. I think it is his best use of leitmotifs. I think it is one of the best uses of comedy that he's ever had in his shows. I think whenever he works with James Lapine, he is brilliant. And James Lapine wrote the book for the musical. I cannot believe that this movie is the same source material as the musical. And I can't believe it because the musical is funny. It's like they took a look at Into the Woods and were like, how can we make this serious? Like, it's the Rob Marshall thing of grounding it in reality to win Oscars is so misguided here in this movie in particular. It feels like we're having to take everything so seriously. Let's have some freaking fun with it. Like, the first act of Into the Woods is a freaking farce. Like, characters are like running in and off and on stage, like they're like falling down. There's a pratfall. There are pratfalls in Into the Woods, the musical. There aren't any. There's nothing like that in the movie. The closest we get is agony, and I only like that because Chris Pine takes his shirt off. And then yeah, and you mentioned that Act Two basically gets relegated to the third act of the movie. So you lose so much powerful, important stuff. The stuff that's actually supposed to turn everything that we saw beforehand on its head. We lose the best, most important number in the musical, No More, to background music. That is insulting as a fan of Into the Woods, that No More is delegated to dialogue that was written for the movie instead of the most beautiful piece that Sondheim has ever written about fathers and sons. It is awful. It is a dreadful movie that I hate sitting through. I do not like this movie at all.
I think the lesson you do need to take from this, Eli, is compare it to the theater show very hard and say, oh, the theater show is much better than the movie.
Because it is.
Yeah, that's why I really haven't gone back and watched it, because I have seen the theater show at this point, and now I'm just like, now if I watch the movie again, I'm not going to like it as much, mainly because of that.
They just make James Corden the narrator instead of having the narrator be an actual character who turns out to be James Corden's dad in the show. Spoilers, sorry, but like, and like also the fact that like they fucking feed the narrator to the giant in the show, and it's a great laugh out loud moment because you don't need the narrator anymore at that point in the show. But you know what you do in a movie? You just lose him. You just lose him. He's just gone. He was just there for the first act, and now he's not there anymore.
Well,
like,
I remember
the movie.
I think they did cast the narrator, because I think Julie Andrews was actually going to be the narrator, because I think I remember seeing that clip somewhere. And then like halfway through, like when they were putting it all together before it was going to be released, they were like, no, it wouldn't work in the film. So they just took that part out and just made it James Corden instead. And I was like,
so we
that
could
would
have
have been
gotten
so interesting.
Julie Andrews, and instead we got James Corden. That is like if I have a block of gold and someone's like, that's a real nice block of gold you got. How about a grain of sand for that? And I'm like, sure.
So
sounds great to me.
So like a cow for some magic beans?
Those beans are important, Tim.
Those are important plot point beans.
If the and also the beans motif kind of gone. They don't really care about motifs in the movie. Do. It's just it's there when it wants to be, instead of like basically in every song like it is in the musical, because you know Sondheim just put those in for fun. There wasn't any importance to when he was doing that. He just did that for fun. No, God, it's like they didn't understand anything. Like the difference in adaptation between Sweeney Todd and Into the Woods is astounding. At least Burton gave a shit about the material. I don't think anybody on this movie cared about the material.
Okay, so before Jack has an aneurysm,
too late.
I think we should move on to our final film. And Jack, just know that you are not alone. But let's move on another 4 years.
No one is alone.
Let's move on to 2018's Mary Poppins Returns.
I can start this one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Because I have almost nothing to say about this movie. Because this is the literal definition of okay to me. Like, this is the most 50% whatever movie I've ever seen. Every performance, I just describe as okay. Cinematography, okay. The songs, okay. Everything about it's just okay. I have nothing else to say. It's okay. Go ahead.
Eli, any thoughts on Mary Poppins Returns?
I'll be a little bit more apologetic on it, because I want to say because I know I had seen Mary Poppins in full at one point in my childhood. I just could never remember the second part of it. But when I watched Mary Poppins Returns, that was the first time I could fully remember, okay, this is a Mary Poppins movie from beginning to end. And I remember enjoying it very much. I remember thinking to myself, man, Emily Blunt is doing a really good job as Mary Poppins. And Lin-Manuel Miranda is having a lot of fun with what he is doing, because I don't think he ever gets a chance to play doing this. And there are a lot of times in just my regular day life where I just go back to the cover is not a book song. And like just in my head, there are just times I just walk around at work and I'm just like, the cover is not a book, so open it up and take a look. Like just for no reason. It's like I can't even remember all the other lyrics. I only remember that part. So that must mean something if I can always just go back to that. But yeah, I honestly do believe that in the context of what they were trying to do, this is a really good movie for what they were trying to do, of like trying to get people back into Mary Poppins, trying to be like, hey, because of the movie that we did about Walt Disney and the writer of Mary Poppins, we're now finally able to bring Mary Poppins back into the Disney home. And that's what because honestly, I feel like that's what the Mary Poppins movie really is. That's what Mary Poppins Returns really is. Like, oh, people like that Saving Mr. Banks. Well, here is Mary Poppins 2. And I think honestly that's what it was. And I really do enjoy it. I honestly do enjoy it. I think the cast does a really good job. I just think that even though I enjoy it, I think there is something that might have been missing. That I feel like that's a common thread with the post Chicago Rob Marshall movies. Like this movie is very like there are moments of goodness, but there's something missing. There's something missing to make all of his other movies great.
Yeah, there's things I agree with both of you. Eli, I agree. I think Emily Blunt did a serviceable job as Mary Poppins when you're, again, comparing to the great Julie Andrews. I thought she did step into those shoes admirably. I'm going to spoil this a little bit. I imagine if you haven't seen it by now, you're not going to, unless you're doing a podcast about Rob Marshall or Mary Poppins very specifically. Some things I found strange were the Emily Mortimer, like, rallying the Labor Party storyline.
The suffragette.
Yeah, the suffragette.
Yeah. And then also by the end, asking the lamplighters to do free labor for them to save their house.
It was nice seeing Dick Van Dyke return in that end cameo, but again, I don't know why he played a different character. That seemed very bizarre to me as well. I know they explain it. I know they explain it.
It was just weird. It's like when I went back to actually watch the original Mary Poppins, and I was like, oh, so he played the dad to the character he's currently playing now. And so it's sort of like it. Look, just going back and watching the original and then watching Mary Poppins Return, it's sort of like, oh, you can see all the pieces that they're trying to harken back to, but at the same time, it's weird if you've never seen the original Mary Poppins.
The standout number was the cover is not the book to me as well. And I kind of liked the physical representation of like the animated world, like where they're escaping or trying to escape that cart, and how the cage looked animated, but it was clearly physical. I kind of liked that production design element to it, but those are really the nicest things I could say. We get Meryl Streep in another like kooky role, which I'm glad she's enjoying her time in all these roles, but just another weird foreign accent Meryl Streep character.
It's fun to see Emily Blunt and Meryl Streep on screen together.
Yeah. But yeah, outside of that, fine.
Meryl Streep doing her best Ed Wynn cameo.
I don't love that they add a villain in as well. I feel like part of the beauty of the original Mary Poppins is that there's no like bad guy, and then
you touched
on this one we have to add Colin Firth, who, you know, Colin Firth is a charmer. I would sell my house to him willingly, but
but that's the thing. I would say you touched on the thing I didn't like most was him as a villain. It was not either serious enough or over the top enough. It was in this weird middle lane of like
grounded realism.
Yeah, I guess. But again, it wasn't believable for either world they were trying to portray. And I thought he was a real stinker. First, again, as much as I love him in Mamma Mia and many other things, he did not work for me in this movie.
Colin Firth is usually a bright light in any film, but in this one, he just felt like a two-dimensional bad guy. It's like, oh, I'm gonna fire you, and then I'm gonna take your house. Why? Besides the financial reasons of your job, why are you so gleeful about this?
For the one other person who has seen this, listening to this podcast, it was just as preparation for Empire of Light. Deep pull, I know. It's because no one's seen that movie.
Well, I'd like to think there's more we could say about Rob Marshall films, but I feel like we've tapped out. So I think
as soon as you hit Empire of Light, you know you've got to rock bottom.
So let's move on to our fantastic fan castings. Here, each of us will cast the 4 main members of the Fantastic Four: Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, and their nemesis, Dr. Doom, with an actor or actress Rob Marshall has worked with previously and who has not had a major role in the MCU. Eli, as our guest, you have the honor of sharing your cast first.
Alrighty. So starting with Mr. Fantastic, when you need a Mr. Fantastic, you need someone who can be smart and arrogant and someone who you can sort of think can play Dr. Doom as well. And this is an actor that I've picked who has worked with Rob Marshall in Mary Poppins Returns that I think could easily play that part because he has played smart and arrogant in a different franchise that's not anything to do with Disney. So for my Mr. Fantastic, I picked Ben Whishaw, who in the other franchise I mentioned was Q in the James Bond. So there's your little smart and sarcastic. For Invisible
Ben Whishaw
Woman,
also famously Reed Richards in my Tom Hooper cast.
there you go.
The musical Reed Richards.
So for Invisible Woman with Rob Marshall, it's very easy to go Emily Blunt, and I was tempted. I was tempted to pick Emily Blunt. However, I decided to go for someone who is a very experienced actress and someone who's a little bit, maybe, I don't want to seem rude to Emily Blunt when I say this, but I may accidentally be, who's a little bit closer to Ben Wishaw's age. And again, I don't mean to sound rude when I say that. But anyway, I also wanted someone who could be a little bit heartwarming and someone who is very funny as well. So for Invisible Woman, I cast Anna Kendrick, because I really love Anna Kendrick, and I want Anna Kendrick to play a superhero in something, and I believe she'd be a great Invisible Woman. For Human Torch, I had 2 in mind for this, but I went with the person that is literally the same age as Anna Kendrick. So for my Human Torch, I cast Sam Claflin, who was in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie that Rob Marshall directed. So we're getting Pirates of the Caribbean connection somehow. For Thing, I wanted an actor specifically who was Jewish, because I feel like that is a major thing for Ben Grimm, and that is a major character detail with the Thing. And so when I was doing my complete research on all the actors, there was only one, I could be mistaken, but there was only one definitively that is a Jewish actor who is about to be in a movie that is coming up that Rob Marshall is directing. So for the Thing, I cast Daveed Diggs, who's about to play Sebastian in The Little Mermaid. And for Dr. Doom, my final pick, I wanted someone who would have a lot of fun being behind a mask, being sort of told, hey, we're not going to see your face, but we're going to hear your voice and you can do an accent with it as well. And this actor is great when he plays character roles and he has a lot of fun with it. So for Dr. Doom, I cast Chris Pine, and that is my Fantastic Forecast.
I think that is a really great cast. As mentioned, we've had a few of these people cast previously, so I'm excited to see how they all fit into your upcoming pitch. With that said, Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you with your cast.
Okay, so for my Reed Richards, I wanted someone who was a little bit dignified, a little bit suave. Just say it. Someone hot. Colin Firth. Come on. Colin Firth has got to be Reed Richards. This has got to be. Like, if we were on video, I would pull up a picture of Colin Firth. Like, look at that man. He's so hot. He's fantastic. He's Reed Richards. For Sue Storm, I picked someone who's seeming to have a bit of a resurgence in her career recently. Very well deserved because she's fantastic. I picked Kate Hudson, who was in 9, but who I think was fantastic in Glass Onion recently. Obviously is amazing and Almost Famous. I think she could bring a really good energy to Sue Storm that the character would need. For her younger brother Johnny, I picked someone who actually looks like they could be Kate Hudson's younger brother, Billy Magnuson, who was Rapunzel's prince in Into the Woods, but who was super, super funny in Game Night. If you haven't seen Game Night, go watch Game Night. It's one of the best comedies in recent memory, and Billy Magnuson is fantastic in it.
Oh no, he died.
One of the best live deliveries in recent memory.
Ever.
Yeah, maybe ever. Yeah, you're right, ever. For Ben Grimm, I did pick someone who admittedly has had a role in the MCU. However, the rules of this podcast dictate that they cannot have had a major role in the MCU. And John C. Reilly has not had a major role in the MCU. And that's why he is going to be my Ben Grimm / The Thing. I just think John C. Reilly is fantastic. And I think he would bring gravitas to the Thing. And then for my Doctor Doom, I was really torn about who to pick for Doctor Doom. I was trying to think of someone who could play conniving, someone who I could see as being a brilliant evil genius, and also somebody who could be really funny. And I molded over for quite a while, and then I realized that the answer was staring me in the face, and that answer came in the form of Christine Baranski. So Christine Baranski as Doctor Doom, I think, would be amazing. So
we're gonna have a lot of fantastic sound drops here, but that is a fantastic choice for Doctor Doom.
That is really fantastic.
I do love the cast top to bottom, but Christine Baranski as Doom is inspired casting.
So good. She is so good.
Well, looking at my cast, you may see where I'm going with my pitch once you see the cast, but I also let Jack and my guest pick first, and I usually follow up with, I don't want to say who's left, but allows me to be creative, let's say. Let's put a positive spin on it. But for my Reed Richards, I cast one of the leads from Chicago, Renee Zellweger. I really don't want to say why. You'll see why in my pitch. Excuse me, that goes for most of these castings. For Sue Storm, I cast her counterpart in Chicago, Catherine Zeta-Jones. For Catherine Zeta-Jones's brother, or Sue Storm's brother, rather, I cast as Johnny Storm from Mary Poppins Returns, Lin-Manuel Miranda. As my Ben Grimm, I try not to do this so much. I try not to duplicate things that another person has picked, but there is no way I could not have picked John C. Reilly as my Ben Grimm the Thing. And finally, as my Doctor Doom, I was so inspired by his performance in 9 that I had to take Guido himself and have the immaculate Daniel Day-Lewis as my Doctor Doom.
I was so curious if anyone was going to have Daniel Day-Lewis as Doctor Doom or Mr. Fantastic.
I did pick him as Doctor Doom, mostly because I didn't find Richard Gere as fitting.
Well, with our films cast, now it is time to pitch our Rob Marshall-helmed Fantastic Four films.
But before we get into those pitches, I have 2 questions for both of you. First, is your film an origin film?
The answer to that is no for me.
Same here, not an origin film.
Mine as well is not an origin film. Secondly, is your film part of the MCU?
Yes.
Not really. Could be, but I'm going to go with no.
I'll say mine is indirectly.
I think that's actually a better way of putting mine as well, to be honest.
This makes me terrified that we have another similar pitch.
I don't think we do. I think given your cast, I don't think we do, Dan.
This is going to be a Planet of the Apes all over again. Regardless, I'm excited to see what these pitches are. And Eli, again, as our guest, you have first crack at your Rob Marshall Fantastic Four film.
All right. So when I was envisioning this, I don't have any notes in front of me. I've just had ideas hit me as soon as Dan asked me. I was like, oh, I got ideas for Rob Marshall, and this is what I was doing. So the overall idea is that this movie very much is a musical set in the MCU. We are getting a Fantastic Four musical MCU film, and it all would start out, we would have this, the sun is coming up in the sky, and we would have this opening number, and people would start questioning, hey, wait, why is everyone singing? And that's when we would get the introduction of a very popular Fantastic Four character known as Impossible Man, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And Impossible Man is a character that can do the impossible. Literally, for DC fans, if you're a fan of Mr. Mxyzptlk, that character, where it's just he can distort dimensions, he's from another dimension, and he can warp reality into whatever he is. He is literally one of the strongest characters in comic books history. And also, I'm looking at this as a sequel to Chris Anthony Lopez's film, which was sort of my idea for an origin film as well, but also set after Avengers Secret Wars. So this is the way to lighten up the mood after a very dark time in the MCU. And Impossible Man the entire time would just be trying to have fun with the Fantastic Four. He's a big fan of musicals. He's been looking at Earth and he's been looking at everything, and he's just been attached to musicals. And so there would be musical numbers. There'd be a moment between Reed and Sue where they're very upset with each other, and we'd get an angry musical of them singing on top of each other. Also, the music would be done by Alan Menken and Lin-Manuel Miranda. They'd be working together to create the songs and the score for this movie. There'd be a moment where Johnny Storm, Sam Claflin's Human Torch, is loving every single bit of it, because I would have him be a closeted musical theater nerd. And he's just having as many musical numbers as he can. There'd be a moment where he's just flying through the sky. Maybe the song would be even called Flame On. And it would just have him singing all about his catchphrase, and the crowd around him would be like, "Flame on! Flame on!" And it would just be so much fun, that musical number. But the entire point of it would be that Impossible Man is trying to have them have a big, grand Act 3 type musical number where it's the Fantastic Four versus Doctor Doom. And there's this big fight happening between them, but like music is going everywhere. Songs are being sung by every single person. But then the way that the Fantastic Four beat Miss Impossible Man is by doing a reprise of an earlier song. So earlier in the movie, we would get our introduction song to Impossible Man. So it'd be like, "I'm Impossible Man, I'm Impossible Man. Anything that I can do, it's right or Dan." I'm not good at thinking of lyrics on the spot. But then in the reprise, it would be starting with Mr. Fantastic going, "But you have to remember, you're Impossible Man." What was that? Sue, "Impossible Man." Because the entire time, the Fantastic Four has been trying to ignore him, being like, "No, this is bad." But in this moment, they're all accepting him. And everyone, the Fantastic Four would sing. Doctor Doom would come in and be like, "No, I'm not doing this. I am not singing. Impossible Man. You're Impossible Man." And then it would just be this big group number where the people of the world, big unison, big choir, big chorus, singing Impossible Man. And then at that moment, Mr. Fantastic would get a device that would negate Impossible Man's powers and basically turn all of the musical, shut it down. And then that's how the musical portion of this movie would end, with Impossible Man getting stuck into a little container where his powers are basically negated because Mr. Fantastic is the smartest man on Earth. But then the film would end, and I'm sort of taking this a little bit from the Flash musical episode, where at the very end it would be Reed and Sue talking to each other, and Reed would start singing her a song, and the movie would end with him pulling out a ring and proposing to her. And Fantastic Four 2 would end with Reed Richards proposing to Sue Storm while singing a song not done by Pasek and Paul, done by Alan Menken and Lin-Manuel Miranda. And that is my Fantastic Four movie, a big musical number where they have to stop Lin-Manuel Miranda, aka Impossible Man.
That was a lot of fun.
I'm pro stopping Lin-Manuel Miranda personally.
No, I thought that was a lot of fun. I think very plausible. If a musical is going to happen in the MCU, that seems like a great way to do it. Yeah, no, I'm on board with that.
That sounded like a ton of fun. I love a good musical. Dan and I famously have been trying to write a Fantastic Four musical for this podcast. So we're just hearing all these ideas. It's just like they're swirling around.
May or may not show up later.
Yeah, we'll see.
Oh, I can't wait for that to happen.
Eli, thank you for your pitch. Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you.
My pitch. You may have heard earlier in this episode my distaste for Rob Marshall's Into the Woods.
What?
But I don't necessarily know if that's his fault. I think maybe it was just he didn't necessarily have the right ideas for it at that point. So that's why I'm giving him the opportunity to redo Into the Woods, but with the MCU characters. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the stage adaptation of Into the Woods. We're going to take the comedy of Into the Woods, and we're going to put that into the Fantastic Four, but we're going to change it up a little bit. So our narrator / mysterious man is going to be Ben Grimm. He's going to appear throughout as the narrator. You're going to hear John Cirella's voice. But when characters interact with him as they're in the woods, he's going to be sort of hunched over. You're not going to really see what this thing is. So he's not even a mysterious man. He's the mysterious thing. The baker and the baker's wife, we are going to swap the genders there. So Sue Storm is actually going to be the baker, and Reed Richards is going to be the baker's wife. And this is because when we meet the witch, who is, of course, our Doctor Doom, in the plot of Into the Woods, the whole story is that the witch stole child of the baker's family. Not the baker, but his younger sister. We're switching this around so that the witch has stolen the baker, Sue Storm's younger brother, Johnny Storm. So Johnny Storm is being kept in a tower, his powers being harnessed by Dr. Doom, the witch, Christine Baranski. Again, I just need to remind you that. We then, of course, will flip over to Jack, who is Peter Parker, Spider-Man, Tom Holland, who, has done Billy Elliot, so we know that he's got those musical steps in him. And Jack has a mother in the musical. In Rob Marshall's MCU Into the Woods, it's going to be Happy Hogan, because of course it is. Red Riding Hood is going to be America Chavez. Again, obvious. I don't know how anyone else would see that. Her wolf is going to be Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night. We have one more story, though. The story of Cinderella. And, who else would you see as Cinderella but Gamora? Because her evil stepmother, Thanos, and her wicked stepsisters, Nebula and Ronan the Accuser. We are bringing Lee Pace back to the MCU where he belongs. And, Cinderella, of course, needs a prince. And who else would it be but Peter Quill? And, of course, Rapunzel needs a prince, but so we're gonna make it Drax. Why not? You know what? Johnny Storm and Drax, I want to see them together. And more importantly, I want to see Chris Pratt and Dave Bautista do Agony. Tell me you don't want that. I'll wait. I know you want that. I know everybody wants to see that.
You won't hear me say that I don't want that.
Exactly. So we're going to take Into the Woods. We're going to make it the MCU. You're going to have to bring them the spider as black as night. But look, I think that Into the Woods was a misguided attempt at a movie, but I think that if you bring in the MCU, have some fun with it, you allow that comedy to actually play through, I think you've got some gold on your hands. So yeah, into the MCU. We're going to call it that. That's my pitch.
I just have one question. Who is the Giant's wife?
Annette Bening from Captain Marvel.
I'll accept it.
I would say Jamila Jamil, the Titania.
Titania, yeah. That's actually better. That's a lot better.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm gonna make one change here. Oscar Isaac is actually now gonna be Rapunzel's prince, because I want Chris Pratt and Oscar Isaac to sing.
So Moon Knight's gonna be
Moon Knight's gonna be searching for Johnny Storm. Because again, why not?
Why not?
Moon Knight could be all the princes, if we would be honest.
Actually, I'd like to change my pitch again, Dan. Oscar Isaac is now going to play everybody in this movie. It's just Into the Woods, but with Oscar Isaac as everyone.
As different personalities.
Yes, as different personalities. It's all Oscar Isaac.
I'm on board.
I am as well. Take the money.
So on that note, I'm glad we had Eli, who had a competent pitch before the two of us here, because I struggled with this. I struggled hard with this. So I wasn't too upset that we had some more time to record. And did it make it any better? It did not.
No, it did not. But you know what? This podcast is not about seriousness.
No, but to be fair, Rob Marshall had 17 years between Chicago to make a good movie and really hasn't. So I don't feel too bad about, having an extra week and not succeeding in a pitch that I am thrilled with. But you know what? I'm going to plug through confidently, because that is what we do here on the Fancast at 4 podcast.
Well, I'll just say I love Into the MCU. I would watch it. I would love to see Into the MCU.
Just imagine Thanos going, "You wish to go to the festival."
Look, the moment you said that,
The festival?
The festival, the
the moment
King's
you said
festival.
Thanos was the evil stepmother, I was sold on everything. Like, yes, give me all of it. I want to see this on stage as a movie, on a Disney park ride. Let's do this.
There are spiders in the sky.
Okay, before this goes off the rails anymore, let's get into my train wreck. Great pitch that I'm about to present to both of you. This movie, it's just called Fantastic. That's what we open up. Fantastic. One, to tell you it's about the Fantastic Four, but also to give the audiences a sense of its quality, i.e. being fantastic. The film opens up with the 4 members of the Fantastic Four invited to the opening night of Fantastic Four the musical. As they get situated in the front row, Ben grumbles to Sue, "I hope this is nothing like the Doctor Strange musical. I don't understand a thing that went on in that. I miss shows like Chicago or Into the Woods. I like those shows." Sue pats Ben on the arm. However, before the curtain rises, an usher approaches them and asks Ben if he would mind moving to a row in the back so the people behind him could see. Ben grumbles more but agrees. Situating himself in 2 seats, Ben prepares for the show. The show goes on. We get numbers that may harken back to our previous episode. We've got You're Gonna Be Fantastic, Jack Mayer original. We're going to have one called Gonna Be Fantastic. See, callbacks here. We're all about our callbacks. A number called The Thing Is, where the thing is saying what the thing is about being the thing and why it sucks, which is going to later reprise into The Thing Is on how everyone's telling him why he is so cool and good. We're going to have If You Could See Me Now, an emotional ballad number by Sue Storm. And then the coup de grace, Say Namor. Namor is an antagonist in the film, and he will be have his own kind of villain number in there, Say Namor. We also do have a Flame On, Clobber in Time, kind of hearkening to kind of the 2 famous Fantastic Four catchphrases. Those are kind of shorter numbers. The other ones are kind of the bigger, more flourishy pieces. Regardless, Ben is not amused and he falls asleep. He awakens in a dream set in the 1920s, a time of liquor and jazz with newspapers looking for the next sensational story. But rather than those vaudeville acts as the main source of entertainment, gossip, and stories, it is the superheroes. This is the Fantastic Four's version of Chicago. Because we talked about it so much, I'm not going to go into the whole spiel, but I will break down the plot points. Reed Richards is accused of killing Dr. Doom, and Sue is falsely accused of attempting to kill her brother Johnny. The public opinion of the 4, except for Johnny who was almost murdered, is low, and Ben was only tolerated before because of the others, but now their stories are selling newspapers, especially the spicy gossip and takedown pieces. This leaves Ben to hire Matt Murdock, played by Richard Gere, to clear their names. However, he turns their story into more of a spectacle to get his name in the papers. The rest of the movie plays out similarly to the events of Chicago. We have Christine Baranski playing J. Jonah Jameson in kind of that press corps, both reach for the gun number. We have the detective at the beginning, played by Taye Diggs, who is actually Spider-Man Noir. And then finally, we have Queen Latifah playing Ben's love interest, Alicia Masters. With all that said, Ben eventually does wake up. But here are some numbers that I would get that are kind of parodies of the numbers we get in Chicago. As mentioned, we have a press conference number. We have a song Ben sings to Sue, kind of wishing he could turn invisible like her. It goes something like, excuse me, if someone big and made of rock walked right past, it'd cause a shock. You may scream and run away. Well, I'm the thing. If someone would even take a chance, stop and give me a friendly glance. But they don't. They're just scared. 'Cause I'm the thing. And even when I try to save your life, the fear I cause just cuts me like a knife. Sometimes I wish, like you, that I could be invisible, inconsequential, and not the thing. Visible, like you, invisible, the inner push and pull. I wish I were invisible so you could look right through me, walk right by me, instead of run away. So yeah, those are some of the numbers. And then the dream ends with a choreographed musical climax of Matt Murdock sharing how to win back the hearts of the public with one big heroic act called Give Him the Old Four Fantastic. Then Ben is roused awake by Sue, and they all start to head home. Ben tries to explain the dream to them, and everyone chuckles in amusement. As Ben heads to bed, he closes his eyes. When they open, we are in his point of view, and we softly hear, "There's Galactus in the sky. There's a big, tall, terrible Galactus in the sky. It's way up high with a look so dour, and the world we live, it will devour. We need some heroes with awesome powers. Fantastic Four. And then the movie ends.
Give them the old
For fantastic.
Give them an act that's quick and silver like.
I love the pitch.
As you were pitching that, I was trying to come up with rhymes for that song specifically. Give them something that will melt their mind. They'll never know you're going in blind. Matt Murdock.
See, there's promise in this pitch.
There's promise in every single one.
Like a Rob Marshall film, there's a nugget of promise in all of them.
Eli, I appreciate that you came out with the Chicago of pitches, and Dan, I'm glad that you and I came with the 9 and the Into the Woods. I think really at the end of the day, this podcast is reflective of Rob Marshall, and what better way to close us out.
We've gotten through our castings and our pitches for a Rob Marshall Fantastic Four film. We hope you, the listeners, enjoyed our train wreck exploration into this what if scenario. I do want to make a special note that the Fancast at 4 podcast is hosted for free on Anchor. We encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check it out. It's really a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. We've now recently been added to the website Good Pods, a site where you can go search out new podcasts, review, leave comments on episodes or the podcast in general. So if you're so inclined to go check it out, we would appreciate any comments and reviews and, ratings that you're able to give.
If you're listening to us on YouTube, we greatly appreciate you hitting the subscribe button and commenting with who your Rob Marshall cast would be, on what you thought of our lists and pitches, and on which director you'd like to see next. And also how much of a train wreck this show was.
I think this was a great show. We all had fun. We all had laughs. We all sang some songs. We all cried a little bit, mainly.
We did cry. I did cry a little bit.
Look, we are exactly what you expect when you go watch a musical. Laughs, music, and crying.
Thank you, Eli. That was very nice of you.
You're welcome.
Touching.
I want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for the fantastic theme music they created for us. And I certainly want to thank you, Eli, for being our guest today. I hope you had fun. Now, please tell our listeners again where else they can find you.
Yes, you can find me everywhere on social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, at Mr. Eli Mac. Actually, on YouTube, it's the Mr. Eli Mac because someone else took at Mr. Eli Mac before I did. Jerks. But yeah, you can find me there. And yeah, that's mainly it. Mr. Eli Mac everywhere.
Wonderful. That is our show. Thank you all so much for listening. I am Dan Bettenhausen.
I am Jack Mayer.
And on behalf of our guest, Eli McCaig, we hope you all stay fantastic.